Living in a world where nations usually measure their strength through their military might, the idea of a country without any proper armed force seems unimaginable, doesn't it? From world superpowers boosting extensive weaponry to even small nations maintaining their modest defense forces, the army is often considered a fundamental unit of a country's national sovereignty. But to your surprise, there are a handful of countries that have chosen to forego this traditional concept altogether. They are surviving without any standing army. These nations rebel against conventional wisdom, relying instead on diplomacy, alliances, or even geographic isolation to establish their security. This idea is fascinating, and at the same time hard to believe how a nation functions without an army in a world fraught with territorial disputes, conflicts, and power struggles. How do these countries protect their borders? And most importantly, what drove their decision to abandon or avert military forces altogether? Is this decision a statement of neutrality, financial problems, or simply a strategic gamble? In our video ahead, we are going to discover the alluring stories of these courageous countries. Also, we'll delve into the reasons why they've chosen this path that's so rarely traveled. So what drove them to the bold decision of foregoing a military force altogether? For some nations, the decision of not having an armed force stems from their commitment to peace and harmony. For instance, Costa Rica is a country that abolished its military in 1948, followed by a brutal civil war. Several casualties happened during that war, and to put an end to that, Costa Rica stopped investing in weapons and soldiers, and instead chose to redirect its resources towards healthcare, the education sector, and environmental conservation. Today, this country is known as one of the most stable and flourishing countries in Latin America, a solid witness, perhaps, to the power of peace over war. But does this bold step eliminate conflicts, or does it simply shift the nature of challenges? If we explore Costa Rica's case, the absence of armed forces hasn't led to any external threats, but it has presented some serious questions about its dependence on diplomacy and law enforcement for security. Nevertheless, the country's accomplishments suggest that prioritizing a country's internal development and advancement over military strength can certainly foster a peaceful and booming society. A few other nations have embraced neutrality as a foundation of their identity. Liechtenstein is a small European principality which has no standing army. They rely on Switzerland for their defense. By declaring itself neutral, Liechtenstein avoids any involvement in global conflicts, which allows it to focus more on its domestic growth and stability. But do you think neutrality is enough to protect a nation in times of crisis? In the case of Liechtenstein, neutrality has proven efficacious. The country's peaceful stance and strong alliances have kept it away from any conflict for over 100 years. Although neutrality may not always offer a perfect guarantee, it provides a strategic and moral groundwork that averts aggression, as only a few nations wish to distort a peaceful and cooperative relationship. Some other countries with no armed forces include island nations, such as Iceland. Their reason lies in geography and alliances. With a strong partnership with NATO and natural barriers of oceans, Iceland feels secure without the need for a conventional military force. The country relies on its coast guards for their basic defense needs and trusts in the collective strength of its allies to put off threats. So, would these nations stand alone if alliances were to step back? And does this reliance come at a cost? Reliance on alliances such as NATO does come with certain risks. While Iceland has taken advantage of the protection of its allies, any weakening of these alliances could leave the nation vulnerable. However, its strategic location and its allies' invested interest in sustaining regional stability make such a scenario improbable. Countries like Andorra and Vatican City depend on unique arrangements for their security. Andorra is nestled in the Pyrenees and depends upon its neighbors, France and Spain, for their military protection. Additionally, Vatican City, the smallest country in the world, consigns its security to the Swiss Guards and Italy's border security infrastructure. Can these arrangements withstand the storms of an ever-changing geopolitical landscape? These kinds of arrangements are unconventional, but have stood the test of time. Andorra benefits from the steadiness of its powerful neighboring countries. and Vatican City has its unique religious significance, which makes sure that its protection remains the priority of its allies. However, in this ever-changing geopolitical paradigm, both countries should remain adaptable, as their long-standing agreements could be tested. Then there is this important concern regarding financial priorities. For smaller and developing countries, maintaining an army is an expense they simply cannot afford. So some of them chose to focus on their internal development rather than external defense. These countries placed their bet on diplomacy and the goodwill of the international community. But what chaos might unfold if diplomacy were to collapse? For such types of nations, the focus on development rather than defense is always a calculated risk. International agreements and diplomatic ties at times step in to fill in the gap. However, the lack of armed forces creates certain risks during the crisis. These countries' demonstration of strong relationships and strategic planning can create a viable alternative to standard defense models. The decision not to maintain an armed force cannot be uniform. It depends solely on each country's geography, history, and values. Several factors shape such decisions. While some nations see it as a bold statement of peace and neutrality, others may view it as a risky strategy that can leave nations vulnerable. Such important decisions have their own pros and cons. Whether this approach be an idealistic one for a conflict-free future, or it will place too much faith and trust in this world that usually prioritizes power over principles, a world that has little to no mercy for the weak? In the long run, these unconventional strategies of such nations affirm that peace is not solely the omission of conflicts, but it is a commitment to different priorities: education, trust, and cooperation. While the risks associated with this are beyond a shadow of a doubt, their impressive history and stories challenge global norms and present a proactive glimpse into the possibility of a planet where strength isn't measured by accoutrements, but by a bright vision and resilience of communities, the acuity of relationships, and the shared vision of a peaceful future. This is a vision of a world where peace is far more than just an idea. It is the foundation on which stability and progress are firmly built.